Hello, welcome again. This is Dr. Davila, and I'm so excited to talk to you all about our first article here that was mentioned in the list that we reviewed last time. This one's called Some Current Dimensions of Applied Behavior Analysis, Baer, Wolf, and Risley, 1968. One of the most highly cited, if not the most cited, article in our field. Now, why is this so important? And I'm going to actually talk about that today. Let me actually turn off my computer, my camera, so I can show you all specifically just the article so we can focus there. So I went ahead and highlight some sections here, and I'm going to go ahead and review these sections as I go through the article. But one of the main things about behavior analysis, when we talked about the evolution of the field, is that back in the 60s, and specifically in 1968, there was a need for some type of, parameters, some type of breakdown to practice this field in a way in which it would be appropriate for the people we're serving. In this case, this particular article provides some type of framework to be able to ensure that we're staying within the standards, some type of standards, some type of way to ensure that people are not doing something that's not appropriate when we're working with human beings. So I think that the overall intentions to help on that end by these particular individuals is something that is so important, right? I think it's so critical. Even today, we're still, when we go to grad programs, even before grad programs, we're still reviewing these things. When I do my trainings for behavior technicians, I still review these particular dimensions because it's so important. Now, one of the things that I've found out too is that a lot of people, we lose, some of that if we don't read it or review it. When I say lose, you basically weaken your repertoire. So it's very important to go back to it, right? You go back to the essence of why our field is the way it is and what we should be doing on a daily basis when we work in the field. So I'm going to go ahead and start reviewing some of these notes here, some of these areas that are highlighted. I'm not going to read the entire article. So let's start with the first one. So despite variable precision, elegance, and power, it has resulted in general descriptive statements of mechanisms that can produce many of the forms that individual behavior may take. So up to this point about behavior analysis, it was very general ways of describing how behavior analysis can be effective with human beings. So that right there already points out one of the reasons why this particular need to create and establish these particular parameters that we're going to review right now, these dimensions that we're going to talk about. The next one is here that I highlight is a society willing to consider technology of its own behavior apparently is likely to support that application when it deals with socially important behaviors. And I'm going to, say retardation, but as you know, intellectual disability is the way that we describe it. Crime, mental illness, or education. So one of the main things in the core aspects of this particular dimensions is the social significance. And we're going to talk about social significance a lot because everything that we do when working with the client, working with the member or student, whoever, whatever it is that the organization calls the people we serve, at the end of the day, it's about how important is our service, how socially important it is, how socially significant it is to the people that we're helping. Okay, so that's something that's going to be mentioned. The whole aspect of analytic behavioral application is a process of applying sometimes tentative principles of behavior to the improvement of specific behaviors and simultaneously evaluating whether or not any changes noted are indeed attributable to the process of application, and if so, to what parts of that process. So this is going to talk a little bit about analytic, right? The whole analytic part that we're going to review, which is so important. One thing that I've noticed working in the field is that there's a lot of different types of treatments that we put all at the same time, which is called treatment packages. We're trying to find solutions. We're trying to quickly make an adjustment to the environment so we can see improvements. But sometimes we get so lost in that particular process that we don't even know what's the treatment that's actually working or the one that's being effective. So here in this particular dimension that we're going to look at in a little bit, the analytic one really talks about the importance of really understanding the value of each of these particular interventions that you're implementing. The next one is the difference between applied and basic research are not differences between that which discovers and that which merely applies what is already known. So a little bit more information about, understanding a bit more of the importance, right, of what you're doing. It's so critical to always be in tune, right, with the research behind it. But currently, the chromosome structure and I'm going to once again say intellectual disability individual with intellectual disability does not lend itself to experimental manipulation if the interest of bettering that behavior, whereas the reinforcement input is always open to current redesign. So the whole aspect of, understanding that there might be some aspect of physiology, right, that we have to take into consideration, but nonetheless, we're always going to look at, behavior from an environmental point of view, but it's very important to always emphasize that, and that every individual is different, right? And that's so important, especially when we talk about, behavior analysis. We treat each individual with their own particular plan, their own particular programming. So that's something else that is so important to emphasize. Here's another one that I highlighted, but a laboratory is simply a place so designed that experimental control of relevant variables is as easy as possible. Unfortunately, the usual social setting for important behaviors is rarely such a place. Consequently, the analysis of socially important behaviors becomes experimental only with difficulty. So here what is basically talking about is the whole aspect of our science, right, came from the whole mindset of a laboratory, right? Working in a laboratory, have control of all the particular non-human organisms, in this case, rats and pigeons. So there's all those studies that were done, by B.F. Skinner and other previous researchers. And here it just talks about that one of the main, difficulties is the fact that it's so hard to have control over, the environment, right? When working in the home setting, for instance, you have a lot of, different competing contingencies. For example, you have family members that may come in and provide attention when you don't want them to come in and provide attention. You may have the noise on the neighbor's apartment, that can also like get your client to be off, off task, So there's so many variables that sometimes are so hard to control, and that's one of the things that I emphasize here. Here's another one. So this is not because Applier is an easygoing, liberal, or generous fellow, but because society rarely will allow its important behaviors in the correspondingly important setting to be manipulated repeatedly for merely logical, comforted, scientifically skeptical audience. So one of the things that, we talk about in behavior analysis is the whole aspect of being able to replicate, turn on and off the behavior. And I think a lot of times what happens is that, especially when you're working with children, when you're working with very vulnerable populations, when you on purpose or not on purpose, but probably wouldn't be the word, but in a way to try to like assess whether a certain contingency does cause a behavior more than another. Sometimes that can lead for an individual to engage in more tantrums, and sometimes people don't like that, right? There's some parents are not happy about that. So it's very important to understand that, as much as possible, as much as we want to do some of these things, sometimes people might not be open to that. Some people might truly not be okay with you on purposely trying to trigger some of these behaviors. And that's something that was mentioned here. Now, I want to also remind you that, we're not building fluency in this particular, review. I'm just kind of reviewing the article in a generic matter. For some of you that you're working on your in grad school right now, you need to work on fluency, SAFMETs and all that good stuff. You're going to have to create some SAFMETs for yourself. And for sure, you're going to have to go and find these particular, dimensions and define them in ways in which you can be able to respond, right, to whenever you have your exam, your test. That's how I did it. I actually created flashcards and just basically worked on studying these particular these particular terms. So here we go. So the first one is applied behavioral is the second one. Analytic is the third one. The fourth one is technological. Fourth one is conceptually systematic, and the last one's effective. Okay, so we got applied, behavioral, analytic, technological, conceptually systematic, and effective. And also the last one's actually generalization, right? Generality. So that is something else that we're going to talk about. Now let's start off with applied, right? So what is applied? And applied, honestly, it's more about making sure that it's something that has some type of significance, right, to society, right? And here it actually talks about it that in behavior application, the behavior, stimuli, and or organism under study are chosen because of their importance to man and society, rather than their importance to theory. So here we go a little bit off of what traditionally was the whole aspect of behavior analysis, which is basically the importance of the laboratory, the importance of doing the very, very hardcore research. Here we're now looking at society, right? And that's a whole different way of how our field, right, has evolved, and trying to now work with humans, right? And like I said, when this particular article came out in the 60s, right, 1968, this was very new, right? The whole aspect of being able to integrate behavior analysis to humans was very new. So that's something that they emphasized there. In applied research, there's typically a close relationship between the behavior and stimuli under studying the subject in whom they're studied. So once again, the whole aspect of understanding, the whole concept of, the behavior, right, and the stimuli and the fact that they're so together, right? And now we're dealing with humans, it's a lot more sensitive, component to this. Okay. Here's the next one. So does a primary question in the evaluation of applied research is how immediately important is the behavior or these stimuli to this subject? And I think that one of the most important things that I remember now, and actually I do this, right, because I still do assessments, is, parents are going to give you a significant list of different concerns and questions they have about their child. And a lot of times what I try to do is I try to basically, say, hey, look, so really which particular behavior here, which particular objective here, do you currently have a need for at this moment? So like an example I had not too long ago is I had a client who has some difficulty, manding, right? Manding for, for certain things, right? In the home setting. But they also had a very difficult time taking a bath, right, and brushing their teeth. So, we were able to basically I had to kind of emphasize to the parents, like, as much as I want to work on language, as much as I want to work on these particular skills you just mentioned to me, the whole aspect of getting your child to be, able to, take a bath and also to brush your teeth is probably, in regards to the priority list is extremely important, right? Because, you might have a problem there with the child getting sick because they're not able to clean themselves properly, especially when they're brushing the teeth. So it's all about prioritizing what it is that you need to emphasize or focus during those particular initial points. But here, once again, the question is, how immediately important is this behavior or these stimuli to the subject? And that's going to be really the question you need to pose and ask yourself. Okay. The next one is behavioral, right? And it's obvious, when you have behavior analysis, it has to be behavioral, right? Here is basically talking about that, let me read this right here. Thus, it usually studies what subjects can be brought to do rather than what they can be brought to say, unless, of course, a very response is a behavior of interest. So here, kind of talks a little bit about the focal point is more about the actual behavior, quantifying that process, which we'll talk about a little bit, and how you're going to be able to track that data, right? At the end of the day, we want to see whether we can be able to operationally define, is what we say now, right? Operational definition of that particular response. The relevant question is not what he can say, but what he can do. Once again, emphasizing that we're focusing more on what the person's able or what the person response looks like. Since the behavior of an individual is composed of physical events, its scientific study requires their precise measurement, which I talked about earlier, right? And as a result, the problem of reliable quantification arises immediately. So here the main focus is trying to, get that particular definition down to a point where it can easily be quantified and measured. A useful tactic in evaluating the behavioral attributes of the study is to ask not merely what's behavior change, but also whose behavior. And sometimes that's also an issue too, that, when you're, observing something, when you're measuring something, you really, really badly want the behavior to improve, right? I think that that's just human nature. We want people to do better. And sometimes the problem is, as an observer, that can also create an issue that you can, technically speaking, also basically not be tracking data the way it should, right? You start measuring things and tracking things where it can represent the right stuff. I'm not saying that everybody does this, but it is totally possible because we're so, in tune with the person that we're working with the data with the person we're taking data on. So here in this particular paragraph, it talks about that if humans are observing and recording the behavior under study, then any change may represent a change only in the observing and recording responses rather than the subject's behavior. So it's not really the behavior, the subject's behavior that's changing or the client's behavior that's changing, but rather the behavior of the observer. So exclusive measurement of reliability of human observers thus becomes not merely a good technique, but a prime criterion of whether the study was appropriately behavioral. So it is so essential that when you're doing any type of measurement, right, we talk about having some type of inter-observer agreement or having another observer in the environment, having people that are not, typically there to do data collection, to do those spot checks, to make sure that we're not getting off track with regards to our measurement system. And especially when you're training a behavior technician to do the data collection, or if you're yourself, right, you're a behavior technician that you're working with the client, and you're learning how to do data collection, it is so important that you ask your supervisor, hey, can you really quickly do a spot check with me, just making sure that I'm actually, taking the right type of data. Okay. The next one is analytic, and to me, analytic is probably one of the more, like essential dimensions that unfortunately in our field gets lost. And here basically, and I'm going to start reading from the top here. So the analysis of behavior as a term is used here requires a believable demonstration of the event that can be responsible for the occurrence or non-occurrence of that behavior. An experimenter has achieved an analysis of behavior when he can exercise control over it. So this is so important. Basically, this talks about the whole scientific approach of when we're measuring, not measuring, but actually tracking whether the type of treatment that we're implementing is actually making a change, right? Can we be able to turn on and off the switch when we talk about, behavior? And that's really important, right? That's really important. Here's another one. The first can be referred. So now we're going to talk about ways in which we can assess this, right? For those that have taken some type of, single subject design courses, the reversal is one of the ones that's mentioned a lot, initially being able to go from point A to point B and then from, again to point A and then go to point B. So basically the whole aspect of reversal design, being able to use a reversal design in a basic, and some type of like basic example of a single subject design can help, can help. And here's where it mentions that the first can be referred to as a reversal technique. Here a behavior is measured and the measure is examined over time until its stability is clear. And once again, here the main thing is just having some type of like experimental manipulation, some type of experimental control when you're doing even your own practice, right? And I think that's so important. A lot of times, I question whether that's something that's is still happening, right? Especially you as a newer behavior technician, you got to also, now that I'm kind of like talking to you about this, you have to ask, right? Sometimes your supervisor, hey, can I really quickly look at the data? How's it looking so far? And obviously do it in a polite manner, where they're not going to feel like you're questioning what they're doing, but rather, just kind of inquiring whether, whatever it is that we're doing, if we're actually seeing a change and if it actually is, truly like the reason why this client is improving here. Another type of design that can be used is called the multiple baseline design. So that's something else that when you're talking about analytic, you for sure can be able to use a multiple baseline design to be able to see whether whenever you present that particular intervention or treatment, you're going to start noticing changes across different types of behaviors, different types of like if you're going to see the type of response to different settings, so on and so forth. So here we kind of a little bit get into more of the type of information about single subject designs, which in the future I'll have definitely a conversation about that with you. But I think in general, once again, analytic to me is so important, and I'll emphasize that the importance really is because it is the essence of what we do. We should be able to truly be confident enough to say that the reason why this change in behavior occurred was because of this treatment, and it wasn't because of some other type of variable. Okay. So let me see here. If there's anything else that I highlighted. Here's another point that I added. So this just talks about parametric. Also, component analysis is another one. So both the parametric and component analysis are other ways in which you can be able to kind of assess, the level of control that you have in regards to how, how strong is your treatment when it comes to like, assessing whether you're actually making a difference, if this treatment is actually, the reason why we're seeing those changes. All right, so the next one is technological. Technological basically is like, a breakdown of what it is that you're doing. So like if you're doing a behavior plan, you want to make sure that it's broken down extremely well to a point where anybody can be able to read it and implement it. Here basically it's, ensuring, right, that you're describing it so well. Here they put the best rule of thumb for evaluating a procedure description as technological is probably to ask whether a typically trained reader could replicate that procedure well enough to produce the same results given only a reading of the description. I always talk about it like when you have your manuals, right, your car manual, if you need to figure something out with the car, you can go to the manual, read it really quickly, and it'll break down the process for you. And that's how it should be. Behavior plans should be that way. If someone reads it and they're kind of like not sure of what it is that they need to do, or is this not clear enough, then that's where you should probably be able to like, probably go back and revisit and edit that because it is so important. And especially when you're working with in the home setting with parents and you're doing the whole parent training component, if your procedures are not really well described, they're just not clear enough. Sometimes the verbiage we use is also, not really clear for a parent that's not, well versed in behavior analysis. It's very important to ensure that you break it down to a point where people can understand it and they can be able to implement it, because that really is the purpose behind a behavior plan. The conceptual systematic part is here, so they call it conceptual system. This is basically that the field of applied behavior analysis will probably advance best if the published description of procedures are not only precisely technologic, but also strive for relevance to the principles. So this is just talks about the principles of behavior that, as much as we're implementing all these different interventions, that we can never, go away from the principles, right? That anything that we're implementing has to stay within the whole principles of behavior analysis specifically. And if you are going away from that, that's a problem, right? And that's where it's really important to ensure that, whatever type of intervention you have, that you go back to the principles and think about, oh, is this reinforcement? Is this punishment? Is this discrimination? It is basically the whole gamma of like principles. Am I still in tune with that? So that's so important when you're looking at, whether something's conceptual or systematic. Now, effective is something that's really crucial here, because we talked about social significance earlier, that when we're kind of like pinpointing behaviors, right, that are, whether we're going to look at them at whether they're really important at that moment. Here, we're going to actually look at whether something that you have implemented is truly effective, right? Not effective for you just as a practitioner, right, or as a clinician, but rather effective to the people that are, actually implementing this or seeing the effects of it, like parents, like teachers, anybody, caregivers, anybody that, has a day-to-day interaction with the person you're working with. Here is basically, if the application of behavioral techniques does not produce large enough effects for practical value, then application has failed. So in general, like, that when you implement behavioral analysis, there has to be significant enough change for it to actually make a difference, right, in the person's life and also the people around them life. How much does the behavior need to be changed? Obviously, that is not a scientific question, but a practical one. Here, this last one I like a lot, because it talks about, in this case, opinions of ward aids may be more relevant than opinions of psycholinguists. So here, just basically the fact that, it's more important for the people that are actually, truly implementing this or seeing the effects of it on a daily basis. One of the things I always suggest for the effectiveness, and especially at our organization, is I always tell people to do surveys. Ask parents, hey, how do you feel so far about our services? Did you see a difference with the treatment? Did you notice that your child's improving, progressing, so on and so forth? Getting this data, to me is so important, because what good is it that if as a behavior analyst, I am so like, confident, oh yeah, this is working, but in reality, it's not really making a difference. The person's not seeing a change in their child's life. And that honestly is not true, the way it should be done, right? And that's why I'm so glad that, they talk about effectiveness, and in terms of being able to assess that is so important. And unfortunately, like I said, we have a lot of people like, that are in the field that are still like, what would probably be the most appropriate way to say it. They think that they know it all, as behavior analysts, and they just want to like kind of just do it their way. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't perceive that well. So it's very important that you ask people like, that you work with, even the staff that are implementing it. Like, you want to ask them, hey, how do you feel like about, the treatment? Do you feel like, we're making progress here? Because once again, it's, you have to have that humility, I would say. A lot of times people lack humility in our field, and I've seen it too many times. So that's where it's important for people to ensure, especially BCBAs, people that are supervisors, to go back and really assess whether what they're doing is actually making a difference and actually effective. Here's a generality, which is the last one, generalization. Here's what I highlighted. A behavioral change can be said to have generality if it proves durable over time, if it appears in a wide variety of possible environments, or if it spreads to a wide variety of related behaviors. So just basically being able to generalize what you teach in one particular location. So like, for example, you're working with the client in the home setting, you're working in a little corner with a table, you have really good control there, but whatever it is, whatever you're teaching there will actually be seen in the community setting. If you go out to stores, will the child be able to tact, fruits, cars, vehicles, whatever it is you're teaching? And that's a really important question here. Generality is such an essential part of all programming that if you don't program for that, you run the risk that the client is just basically going to have such strict seamless control of what they're learning just to one particular location, time, and place. And that's a problem, right? That can be a problem for sure. So that's something that was mentioned here. So here just talked about in general, generalization should be programmed rather than expected or lamented. So I like that right there. Emphasize it, that don't just, just think that it's just going to organically happen by itself. No, you need to actually like program, create opportunities where the client's going to practice the skills, outside of the, location where you tend to be working with them on the programs. And I'm going to read the last point here. Thus, in summary and applied, behavior analysis will make obvious importance of the behavior change, which we talked about, that the focus is behavior that you can quantify, behavior that you can observe, right, and measure, which is the next was quantitative characteristics. The experimental manipulation, which I talked about, the whole analytic, which analyzed with clarity what was responsible for the change. Technologically exact, which is really important, right? You describe your procedures, description of all procedures contributing to the change, and effectiveness of those procedures in making sufficient change for value. So like, are we once again making a true difference in people's lives? And the generality aspect of it, that is it now also generalizing across other places. So these are basically the dimensions that were talked about in the 1968 article. Like I said, highly cited, so important. I would highly suggest for you to read this article 10 times if you can, do it where you can be able to like just ensure that you have really caught on to these different dimensions. Once again, it's that really is so important. I cannot harp on it. When I started off in this field, I remember that I was briefly introduced to it through like the new hire trainings, but truly I had to like read this article like probably like good 15, 20 times to truly be able to understand what was going on. So if you're new to this field and you're in an undergrad class or even in a grad class, go back to it, read it and print it out. I know that people want to say trees, but this one right here, you probably might want to have somewhere around you where you can always read that and refresh yourself. If you're a BCBA, BCABA, hey, don't ever forget, you have to go back to read these things because it does happen, guys. We got to be humble enough that sometimes we get so caught on with our day-to-day, jobs and responsibilities. And sometimes we look back, we're like, oh, so what was that dimension again? Because it happened to me. I'm humble enough to tell you that. So really important to always stay in tune with these things. But honestly, really cool to talk to you all again. I hope to, be able to present the next article. Hopefully next week I'll have a chance to get another recording. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and put it on the comment section there and I'll definitely take a look. I'm more than happy to interact with you all. And once again, don't forget to subscribe to this, YouTube channel. I have a lot of different material, a lot of ideas, and I really appreciate your support on that end. So you all take care of yourself and have a great one.